Okay, Paul, you should be good to go. Go ahead and make sure you're unmuted. And
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Are you seeing the picture of Ron Smith?
yes, we are. Thank you.
Very good. All right, then. Thank you, Deb, for getting us coordinated and working together. And I appreciate the fact that you came on an hour early in order to do that. And that means that you get a long term with us on Monday evenings. And this is 5 years you've been doing that. I very much appreciate the support that you've given us. If the rest of you appreciate that too, a round of applause, I think, would be appropriate for Deb Luz. All right. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Ron Smith, who is a professor emeritus for mathematics at Graceland University. And he has taken on the challenge to let us see ourselves in old scripture. Fascinating challenge. And this evening, his presentation is entitled Daniel's Prophecy with the Book of Mormon Connections. He has presented the very first of our presentations back in August of 2020. And he's added the Christmas program a couple of times, and he's been asked to do that again this year because of popular appeal. He also gave us the fractal approach to prophecy in the Book of Mormon, and to me, one of the most outstanding performances of all of our 5 years, Father and Son 2 or 1. And these are available on the YouTube, available due to the efforts of Roger Gilbert, and so you can go back and pick those up if you haven't seen them previously. And so we certainly want to welcome Ron back this evening to share with us the story of Daniel as it shows up in the Book of Mormon. Let us pray together. God, who numbers the innumerable stars in the heavens, our brothers and sisters, and who rode upon Belshazzar's banquet hall, mene tekel upharsin, as a warning to Belshazzar and perhaps to us all. For we too find ourselves numbered and nearly finished, found wanting when weighed in the balance of time. And we read invitations in the Book of Mormon to be numbered among your people, requiring that we repent of our traditions and learn to embrace your love sublime. To be numbered among your faithful, your children who respond to your voice, is our quest, our desire, yet sometimes we find it a difficult choice. For we live in lands of conflict where beasts of empire devour resources and men. In nations where we do not acknowledge those with whom we can share organs, yet to be human like us, our kin. Yet this evening, Brother Smith comes to us to share connections in the scriptural word. So we ask you to help us keep our ears, our minds open to hear the words numbered that we should have heard. So bless him, bless us, that we respond effectively to the messages engraved upon our predecessors' hearts, even upon Belshazzar's banquet hall. That we be numbered among those who respond, to be gathered, not divided from responding to your call. In the name of the Master of Men, we pray, the Master of time and eternity beyond. Amen. Brother Smith, I am about to stop sharing, and I'll turn the floor open to you. And if you'd like to allow people to interrupt, you're welcome to, but otherwise we commonly ask people to wait until the question and answer period after you've given your presentation. And so you're started screen sharing with a beautiful mountain view.
Yeah. It is a pleasure to be with all of you and to have an opportunity to share with you once again. Let's see. This is not where I want that. Oh, this meeting's being recorded. Okay. Okay. So it's being recorded. I I'd like to share this. This is a Book of Mormon forum, and because we've been going a long time, I think it's okay. I hope it's okay if we take a tangent. And what I have to say tonight really comes mostly from the Book of Daniel, but I believe there are some connections with the Book of Mormon that make it very, very interesting. And so it's kind of a tangential viewpoint, but anyway, it is what it is. And I I would do lots better if you were all actually sitting in front of me and we could talk together, but we'll do it this way because this is the way it goes. When I was fairly young, I think I was probably, well, I was still in grade school. I was in a Sunday school class, and my teacher said, well, they thought that Daniel was just kind of made up after the fact, and they needed uh, some heroes, and so they um, kind of put Daniel together to give hope to the people and to the Jewish people. And so I went home and asked mom, and of course, mom in her way, she took me to the Bible and said, well, let's look up what it says about Daniel. And so we first looked up Jesus, and Jesus speaks about Daniel, so he thought Daniel was real. And then we looked up Ezekiel, and Ezekiel was contemporary with Daniel, and he wrote about Daniel as if he were real. And so that was the my introduction to Daniel. Um, Daniel gave a particular prophecy that I'd like to share with you, and it's called the 70 weeks prophecy sometimes. And we're going to show these things that the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel speaks very specifically about the life, the death, and the ministry of Jesus Christ. And we're going to see how the Book of Mormon helps us understand the prophecy, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's important. Now, not in that order, of course. We'll start with something that I would use to warm up my class, asking if these things are named in the scriptures. And the first thing is tribulation. And if I could see you all, I would ask you all to put your thumbs up or down if tribulation is mentioned in the scriptures. How many of you say thumbs up and how many say thumbs down? Just do it real quick. Is tribulation in the scriptures? Okay, I see some of you. And of course, the correct answer is yes. And here's one of the places. When thou art in tribulation, and all these things are come upon thee, even in the latter days, that's our day, if thou turn to the Lord thy God, and shalt be obedient unto his voice, for the Lord thy God is a merciful God, he will not forsake thee, neither destroy thee, nor forget the covenant of thy fathers, which he sware unto them. And if you don't get anything else out of this presentation tonight, at least remember this was back in Deuteronomy, talking about our day and saying that God would protect those who he wouldn't forget those who remember the covenant which of the fathers. How about the 7 years of tribulation? We hear about that a lot. Is that in the scriptures? Let me see your thumbs up or thumbs down. What do you say? Okay, I see some thumbs up, some thumbs down. And actually, there's no place in the scriptures except for Daniel's 70-week prophecy. It's the only scripture that's cited to support the theory of 7 years of tribulation. And it's the only one that I know of anyway that's ever cited to support that. And I think that we have a perspective that will maybe change your mind on that. Now, that's not to say there's not going to be tribulation. It just is the 7-year theory. I don't find that any place in the scripture. How about the rapture? What do you say about the rapture? Yes or no? Thumbs up or thumbs down? What do you say? I see some of you aren't saying anything. Well, okay. So here we go. Actually, the word rapture is not found in the Bible. The rapture theory first appeared in the 1830s. In fact, a fellow named Darby was the first one to, at least in print, put it out there. And I think that that's kind of interesting. But why is that important? Well, as we said, the 7 years tribulation is only mentioned in the 70 weeks prophecy, or that's what some people understand it to be. And I think it's not understood in part because the Book of Mormon is not considered. And in fact, the whole historical view of Daniel's prophecy is discarded by many modern theologians precisely because they don't understand the restoration to have occurred. And viewing the rapture as an escape from tribulation and judgment may very well be devastating when tribulation occurs without the rapture. There are I've listened to many sermons where people say, well, if you get raptured, you're not going to be judged. And I think if there's tribulation, and if you ask the Chinese who are being murdered consistently, if you ask other places where there is so much prejudice and persecution of Christians these days, there is tribulation going on. And as far as I know, the rapture hasn't occurred. So, a little bit about some prerequisites. Naturally, there's going to be a little bit of math because I taught math. So we're going to learn a little bit about our calendar. And we're going to get a little bit of history about Titus and Jerusalem, and a little bit of etymology for those of you who are English types. And so we'll start with no further ado with our calendar. You all know that our calendar does not have a year zero in it. And so we go from 4 BC to 3 BC to 2 BC to 1 BC to 1 AD, like that. And so if I had you in class, I would ask you to, of course, respond. 1 year after 4 BC, you can just look at that and you get 3 BC. And 3 years after 4 BC, you can grade yourself. You can try these and then grade yourself. 3 years after 4 BC is, well, 1 BC. 4 years after 4 BC is, well, that's 1 AD. And 5 years after 4 BC is 2 AD. Now, the reason that I put all these up here is because as a mathematician, I would like to write a formula. And right about now, as soon as the X and Y comes up, my wife's eyes would glaze over and she would be lost. But for those of you who would be interested, if you've ever used the word "it" in your life, do you know what "it" means? Well, it means, of course, whatever you want it to mean. It stands for something that is specific, but you haven't named it, so you call it "it." And I've just used about 10 times in the sentence, and I think most of you understood most of what I was saying. Well, in mathematics, it used to be, before we did formulas like this, we used to say "it," or we used to have to describe the number. But there might be two different numbers that you want to not name, and so we use different letters for those two numbers. So if you see an X and a Y, like here's X years after Y BC, you know that whenever X occurs in the formula, you use this number, the first number, and whenever Y occurs, you use that number. So it's X years after Y BC is X minus Y plus, and this little thing right here means If X is bigger than or equal to Y, in other words, if that's true, you add a 1. And if it's false, you add 0. So let's try it out just to make sure we can do that. So 1 year after 4 BC, you take 1 minus 4, and 1 isn't bigger than 4, so we add 0. And that gives us minus 3, which is 3 BC. So it works. And 3 years after 4 BC, 3 minus 4 is minus 1. Yeah, you do have to know about negative numbers to make this work. But anyway, that's 1 BC. 4 years after 4 BC, you take 4 minus 4, but then because those are the same, you add the 1 and you get 1 AD. And 5 years after, 5 minus 4 plus 1, and you get 2. So that's the way the formula works. Now, you can, if we're just talking about 4 BC, you can just look at the little thing and you can count over. But if we're talking about 457 BC and a bunch of years after that, it's nice to have a formula. So I just threw in a formula so you can, so that's all the math that you're going to have tonight. Now, a little bit of history. Titus and Jerusalem. The Roman general Vespasian came to Judea to quell the Jewish revolt of 66 AD. And he was declared emperor of Rome in 69 AD. And so, of course, he had to leave, but he left his adopted son Titus, who was now a prince, to finish the Jewish war. And Titus besieged Jerusalem beginning in 70 AD. And according to the Jewish historian Josephus, Titus did not want to destroy the temple, but it was eventually set on fire by the Jews themselves initially, and the temple and Jerusalem were completely demolished by the Romans. And that happened starting in 70 AD. And finally, as far as prerequisites, a little bit of etymology. What does the word decade mean? Well, we all know what decade means. It means 10 years, right? But actually, decade itself means literally 10 of anything. And in fact, one of the first uses in print was in Middle French. It meant a series of 10 books by a particular author. They were history books. In Roman Catholicism, it means a series of 10 beads or the prayers associated with them in the rosary. And in the French Revolutionary calendar, they didn't want to have a week because that a 7-day week, so that was because that was Jewish. So they had a 10-day week and they called it a decade. It was a decade of 10 days. And from the 18th century, physics and engineering, the interval between any two quantities having the ratio 10 to 1 was a decade. And starting in about the 16th century, a decade began to refer to a historical period of 10 years in which the beginning year ended in 1, or more recently in 0, so that the decade of the 60s we think of as 1960 to 1969. So that's the etymology of decade. Well, in reference, another online dictionary said, in reference to a span of 10 years, originally it was a clipping of the phrase decade of years. So you used to have to say the decade of years because it meant a decade of something and you had to tell what the something was. But we've all clipped that off, and just decade now to us means a decade of years. Okay, so what about Shabuah? Shabuah is the word translated as week in Daniel, the 9th chapter. And if you look in Strong's Analytical Concordance, it says literally sevened. That is a week, specifically of years, 7 or week. And the sevened is not a misspelling here. It's actually a verb form. And the Shabuah, which is translated as week, is actually a verb form. And it's talking about 7 things completed. And in Strong's Analytical Concordance, they talk about the decade, or the week was a week of years, 7 years. In Young's Complete Concordance, they say the word week came from Shabuah, and it means a 7 or a week. So Let's look at these 4 verses from Daniel, the 9th chapter, starting with verse 24. And we'll just read what it says and see if we can keep track of what's going on. It starts off this way. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. So this is the overview of the whole prophecy. There are 70 weeks, and so I've made a number line here that has from 0 to 70. And what's supposed to happen in that time? The transgression is to be finished. There'll be an end of sins, and you got to make reconciliation for iniquity and bring everlasting righteousness and seal up the vision and prophecy and anoint the most holy. So that's what's going to happen in this 70 weeks time. Going on to the next verse, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So I've drawn these up here. These are not to scale. You have 7 weeks, and then you have 60 would be, a score is 20, so 60 would be 60, 62 weeks. And you'll notice that 7 weeks plus 62 weeks gets you to 69 weeks. And so, of course, there's 1 week left over to make the 70th week. And as I said, these are not they're not they're not the right width, but there's most of the stuff that we're going to talk about happens in that last week. So there we go. So we start off with the command to restore and build Jerusalem. And at 69, we have Messiah the Prince shall come. So we have the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem is the first thing he's talked about. And Messiah the Prince, he actually says again that's the 62 weeks. So you've got the 2 periods and the 2 things happening. I think everybody that looks at this long enough agrees with this interpretation. So who is this Messiah the Prince who's going to do these things? Who's going to finish the transgression and make an end of sins and make reconciliation for iniquity and bring everlasting righteousness and seal up the vision and prophecy? Who do you think that is? Well, from our point of view, it's pretty clear that that's talking about Jesus. And to me, when I read that, I say I can't see how anybody could read it any different. I know that people can, but I don't read it any different than that. That seems to be like talking about Jesus. And then he talks about the individual things that are going to happen. And the first period that he had, the street should be built again and the wall, even in troublous times. And then after 62 weeks, after the 62 weeks, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And as one writer said, if he's cut off and not for himself, that means he must have been cut off for others. So somewhere after that 69 weeks, Messiah is going to be cut off, but not for himself, but for others. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So there's going to be a prince that shall come who's going to destroy the city, or the people of that prince are going to destroy the city, and there's going to be desolations determined. So I've put that here in this place, in contrast to the Messiah who's going to come and who's going to do those things that were talked about initially. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And I believe that that's going back to this Messiah that was cut off for others. He's going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So we've got that last week there where he confirms the covenant. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And so I've put the sacrifice ceasing in the middle of the week there. It says in the midst of the week. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. And I believe that's talking about the second prince that comes, shall make it desolate even till the consummation. Now, it might be the same. If you might be saying, well, Jesus or God used someone to make it desolate, but anyway, I think that's the appropriate way to do that. The pattern is he talks about two things, talks about two periods, he talks about two things that are going to happen, he talks about two people that are going to come, and then he talks about two things that they're going to do. So the question then, this is my visual interpretation of what the 70 weeks prophecy says. And that's just, I haven't done a lot of interpreting what it says, but just looking at the actual words that are there. So if you want to know when this is supposed to start, you would have to know when the command to restore and build Jerusalem was given. And to do that, before I do that, pretty much everybody recognizes that these are weeks of years. And so if they're weeks of years, 7 weeks would be how many years? It's 7 times 7, that would be 49. And 69 times 7 is 483. And I did that on a calculator, so you don't have to worry about it. 70 times 7, that's easier, 490. And halfway in between these two is 486 and a half. If it was exactly halfway, it doesn't say exactly. It says the sacrifice will cease in the midst of the week. So these are weeks of years. So when was the command to restore and return to Jerusalem? It turns out that there were actually 3 different commands to go back to Jerusalem. The first one was given by Cyrus the Great. It was issued in 536 BC, and we can find that in Ezra, the first chapter, verses 1 through 3. And it's fascinating. In Josephus' account, he says that Daniel was reading in Jeremiah and found out that there should be 70 years of captivity, and it says that Cyrus is going to send them back, and so he took the prophecy into Cyrus, and Cyrus saw his name, and that's a fascinating thing, and so he actually sent them back and paid for the restoration of things. He gave that edict. Now, some 89 years later or so, you have a second edict by Darius, and that was in 457 BC, and that is referenced in Ezra 6 through 12. And he sent the people back because the work hadn't been completed at all. And they came to him and said, well, look, Cyrus the Great said we should go back. And so they looked at the records and said, yeah, Cyrus said that, so do it. And then a few years later, 13 years later, we have Artaxerxes, who gave a similar thing. So there were actually 3 different commands to restore and return to Jerusalem. I'm going to use the 457. I'm not going to argue about it. This is the one that I tried first, okay? The 536, the 70 years weren't done yet, and the 457 is as good as any to start with. So that's the one I'm going to start with. And so if we put 457 BC as Darius's command to go back and rebuild the Jerusalem, then we can use our little formula and say, well, how long was 49 years after that? And it turns out that that was 408 BC, and 483 minus 457 plus 1, because 483 is bigger than 457, we get 27 AD. And I was going to just point out the other ones. I didn't put the half in there. That'd be 30 and a half, and then 34 would be the at the end of this at this time. So 27 AD, 30 AD, and 34 AD are from Messiah the Prince to the end of confirming the covenant here. So let's look at the life of Jesus, since we think this was about Jesus. Jesus also came unto John, and being baptized of him and praying, the heavens was opened, and the Holy Ghost descended in bodily shape like a dove upon him, and a voice came from heaven which said, Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age. So Luke actually tells us how old Jesus was when he was baptized. So we'll go from 0 to 30 here, where Jesus was baptized. And then we want to look at his death, and here we'll go to the Book of Mormon. And behold, as I said unto you concerning another sign, a sign of his death, behold, in that day he shall suffer death, the sun shall be darkened and refuse to give its light unto you, and also the moon and the stars. And there shall be no light upon the face of this land, even from the time that he shall suffer death for the space of 3 days, to the time that he shall rise again from the dead. Yea, and at the time that he shall yield up the ghost, there shall be thunderings and lightnings for the space of many hours. So this is the sign that Helaman gives that says that that they'll know when Jesus was to die. And then in 3rd Nephi it says, and it came to pass in the 34th year, in the 1st month, in the 4th day of the month, there arose a great storm, such an one. Whoops. Sorry about that. One more. Okay. There arose a great storm, such as one has never been known in all the land. And then, behold, there was darkness upon the face of the land. So we know that this is the time. And it says it was the 30 and 4th year. They started on when the sign was given that he was to be born, starting their counting. And this is the 30 and 4th year at the very beginning of the year. So how old was Jesus in this 34th year? He was 33 years old. At the end of the year, he would have been 34 years old. So he was 33 years old, and says that's when Jesus died. And when we go over to, again, 3rd Nephi, and by the way, I didn't explain ahead of time, this is the RLDS and the LDS references. So the bottom one's LDS, the top one's RLDS there. And ye shall offer unto me, up unto me, no more the shedding of blood. Your sacrifices and your burnt offerings shall be done away, for I will accept none of your sacrifices and your burnt offerings, and ye shall offer for a sacrifice unto me a broken heart and a contrite spirit. This was when he first got there. This was the voice that they heard, and he says, your sacrifices are done. So Jesus ended the sacrifices. And then he goes on to say, behold, I am he who gave the law, and I am he who covenanted with my people Israel. And if there ever was an instance of Jesus confirming the covenant, I would say that would qualify. So Jesus was confirming the covenant with his people Israel. And he said, other sheep I have, which are not of this land, neither the land of Jerusalem, neither in any of parts of that land round about, whither I have been to minister. But I have received a commandment of the Father that I shall go unto them, and they shall hear my voice, and shall be numbered among my sheep. So we know that Jesus continued to confirm the covenant. We don't have an ending date on that, but we do know that it was sometime after. If you look in He Walked the Americas, you find all of those tribes that have remembered in their oral history the advent of Jesus, who came and taught peace and taught them how to do stuff, and he confirmed the covenant for many, many people of the house of Israel. Now, I went to Wikipedia, so I have their authority. Haha. The date of birth of Jesus is not stated in the Gospels. I agree that. Or in any historical sources, and the evidence is too incomplete to allow for consistent dating. However, most biblical scholars and ancient historians believe that his birth date is around 4 to 6 BC. And the reason that they say it's 4 BC is because Josephus writes about an eclipse that occurred at the time of Herod's death. And we can look and find when that eclipse was, and that eclipse was in 4 BC. So if Matthew's chronology is correct, Jesus was born while Herod was still alive, so that'd be in that 4 BC era. So I decided to put 4 BC for a beginning, and then we can see what's 30 years later is 27 AD, because it's after the 30 is bigger than 4. And then 3 years later is 30 AD, and we don't know the last one, so we can't convert that. But when I saw those, it knocked my socks off, because we've seen those things. This is Daniel's 70-week prophecy. And he says that Messiah the Prince is going to come, and we figured it as 27 AD. And in the middle of the week, the sacrifice ceases. That's about 30 AD, 30 and a half if you want to be right in the middle of the week, where he's cut off for others. And he continues to confirm the covenant. And we know that he did that for some time. Now, we don't know that it ended in 34 AD, but we do know that his work went on, and we do know that he kept confirming the covenant. And because many people don't recognize that Jesus did anything about confirming the covenant after his resurrection, they've said, well, maybe this isn't about Jesus. But if you look at those dates, from the bottom part is the 70-week prophecy, and the top part is what we know about Jesus. And I find that absolutely fascinating. So what we've shown is that the 70-week prophecy of Daniel speaks very specifically about the death and ministry of Jesus Christ. And the Book of Mormon helps us understand this prophecy by emphasizing that Jesus continued confirming the covenant after his resurrection. And this is important because the rapture theory has turned the 70 weeks prophecy into a story about Antichrist instead of Christ. And this I think is the big travesty, the big difficulty, is that people have said, okay, those 69 weeks are up to the time of Christ, and then that 70th week, that's way off, 2000 whatever years later, and it's about this Antichrist that's going to confirm this covenant for a week and do all of this terrible things and blah, 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 blah. And to me, when we see that the Book of Mormon shows that he did confirm the covenant, and he was about ending the sacrifice, and he was doing those things during that time, during that last week of the 70 weeks prophecy. It makes the prophecy make sense because it's all one rather than separate. Now, that's the end of the 70 weeks prophecy, but I did find something else that was just fascinating to me. And it has to do with the word Messiah in the scriptures. And in the Old Testament of the King James Version, I wish you were all here so I could get you to bid on what you thought, how many times the word Messiah appears in the Old Testament. Well, if you guess 2, you are correct. Only 2 times, and those are both in the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. And is it important that the Messiah refers to Jesus? I think so. In the Old Testament, the NIV, it's 0 times. They don't have, I mean, they use anointed rather than Messiah. But I think it's very interesting. In the New Testament, King James Version, how many times is it used? It's used exactly twice. And the first of those was when Andrew comes to his brother Simon, who was later Peter, and says, "We have found the Messiah." And the second one is at the woman at the well, and she tells Jesus, "I know that Messiah cometh." So these were ordinary people. This was a fisherman in Judah, and this was a prostitute essentially in the northern kingdom in Samaria, and both of them knew that Messiah was coming, and that was very important to them. How did they know of the Messiah? Well, it's only twice in the records that we have from the King James Version. Now, in the inspired version, if you look at the number, you'll see that it's 6, and 4 of those are in Genesis. And I was reading a fascinating Jewish interpretation of the 70 weeks prophecy, and they were saying, well, we don't have anything about the Messiah in the Torah. It just doesn't occur there. And I thought, oh, wow, we have it in the Torah in Genesis. In the Restoration scriptures, it's 47 times. There's 43 different verses, with 4 of them have 2 instances. But and this was the fascinating thing. In the Book of Mormon, it says Lehi testified that the things which he saw and heard, and also the things which he read in the book, manifested plainly of the coming of a Messiah, and also the redemption of the world. And when the Jews heard these things, they were angry with him. And that's why they tried to kill him, was because he was testifying of the coming of a Messiah. Isn't that fascinating? And that would have been before it was before the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, before Daniel was taken into captivity. So it was before his prophecy of the Messiah. So either the 70 weeks prophecy was understood commonly to be about the Messiah, or the Messiah is one of those plain and precious things that has been restored in these latter days. I think that's interesting. I read a fascinating book by Sir Isaac Newton called Daniel and the Apocalypse. And he says, amongst the old prophets, Daniel is the most distinct in order of time and easiest to be understood. And therefore, in those things which relate to the last times, he must be made the key to the rest. Easiest to understand, huh? Daniel was in the greatest credit among the Jews until the reign of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And to reject his prophecies is to reject the Christian religion, for this religion is founded upon his prophecy concerning the Messiah. And we have seen why understanding Daniel's 70-week prophecy may be important to us, and how the Book of Mormon helps us understand the prophecy, and that the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel speaks very specifically about the life, the death, and the ministry of Jesus Christ, and not about the Antichrist. So I have one more slide, but it is totally unrelated. So let me see if there are questions or comments or things that you'd like to say. And if we have time, I'll show you one more, but that's my presentation.
Well, thank you, Brother Smith. I am again in awe, although I should hearken to the fact that I anticipated that with your mathematical background that you would be dealing with many tekel a parson.
Well, yeah,
being numbered, measured, and found wanting.
found wanting.
And so I checked that out compared to the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon has numerous references to our being numbered, but the quest is to have us numbered among those who are the followers of the Christ.
Followers of Christ. Yes, I appreciate that.
That was the line I thought you were going to take, and so I find this delightful that you found a way to totally obviate what I was presuming, and find another way to make Daniel's prophecies important here.
Now, I will admit that there are a number of people, even I don't agree with everything that Sir Isaac Newton said about it. He doesn't think we should use the the solar year. He thinks we should use the 360-day year, and there are ways that people have done, and you can find this in infallible proofs and other things. Frank Fry has written a very nice summary of all the ways that you can use different solar years, lunar years, and the 360-day year, and you can still come up with the same dates. And he says that, well, okay, well, the Lord knew that we would have all these different ways and the different times, and so you could still come up with the same dates no matter how you do it. And he's a good God that way. But this happened to be the first way that I looked at it, and just knocked my socks off, because I just did it and it came out, and I'm going, whoa, because I had always hesitated to do it, because every time I would read, one of those things, all of it looked like everybody was just mashing stuff together to try and make it come out right. And so one might say that I did that too, but at least I didn't mash very much. I just put the numbers in there, and they work. So,
well, and I would want to express honor to your mother for recognizing the importance of showing you there were significant, meaningful connections there. I too was confronted as a child with the question of the value and merit, especially of the Book of Revelation with all of its mashing of things, and then Daniel was a bit questionable as well. But then when I was in college, I got to explore more of the many tekel a parson being in a play. It gave me so much more appreciation for what Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were offering in that historical context. And so for us to see ourselves numbered, measured, and found wanting is, I think, the appropriate call to repentance. And
absolutely.
for us to ignore that, well, and the Book of Mormon, to me, this quick review today, just to see that there were a dozen times for the Book of Mormon encouraging us to be numbered among the followers of the Christ. That is, well, many tekel, not a parson, but to be part of Zion. All right, let me yield to other people that have points and questions, and if you'll go to the responses or raise your hand, phenomenal, whichever you have, please let Deb recognize you so that you can be kept in the queue.
Hey, I see Bruce Nelson. Go ahead with your hand raised. You just muted yourself.
Oh, okay. Am I on now? Okay. I just wanted to say that I've spent some time in the area where the wise men uh, gathered because they read the prophecies about the birth of Messiah, and uh, that's not only just recorded in the New Testament, but it's also recorded in the Zoroastrian scriptures. And that's very little known here in the West, unfortunately. And I'm a little uncertain why that hasn't been studied more. But the incidentally, there's no statement of three wise men. I've seen some ancient documents stating that there were 40, which was usually used to indicate a large number. And they saw the signs of the birth of the Messiah and traveled bearing precious gifts to visit the Messiah during his birth. And I've also read physical descriptions of the time of the birth, and I've been to the tomb of Esther and Mordecai, which is also, it was called Ecbatana during the biblical time. Today it's called Hamadan. But the knowledge of the birth of Christ and his teachings uh, is not only in the Jewish and other scriptures, but we know it's found in the Book of Mormon, and I also know that it's found in the Zoroastrian accounts.
It's very fascinating. Appreciate that.
One of those important updates here. I understand the Chiefs are 16-7 lead at halftime. So for those of you that have sacrificed watching that in order to be able on the forum, then we'll please keep you a rough update here.
Hey, John Mueller, go ahead, please.
It's strictly an aside question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I sent a message out on the chat. That painting that you had looked very familiar to me. Can you explain to me where you obtained it?
Which painting?
You, on the number of your slides, you had a picture of a head of Christ.
Oh, that's Knight of Vincent King. And uh, there was was it Holsworth that saw had a vision of Jesus, and Nida was uh, police sketch artist, and so he described it, and she put it down, and we own one of the. She did, it was printed, and she did the coloring on that particular one. I mean, the photograph that I have is from our she that was a gift that one of the congregation, I believe it was the Creston congregation, gave to my mother and father um, a long time ago. That would have been back in the uh, early 60s. So it would have been probably 64 or something like that. That's where it came from. But yeah, it's one that I really like a lot because it has meaning in our, sentimental value.
I can understand that. I was privileged to know Nida Vincent King late in her life and visited with her more than once in her trailer where she lived at the time.
Oh yeah.
And the painting was on display in her living room at that time. And she told me that it was from a vision that Brother Holsworth, evangelist,
Mhm.
had. He had come to visit her, and he described it, and she said she painted it extremely quickly, and he told her to stop at a certain point, and that's where he had her stop. And later on, when she was doing studies in Jewish history, she had a rabbi visit her in the home, and he took one look at the painting and said to her, "Who is this rabbi?"
Mm. Yeah.
And he explained to her when she asked that he explained that this head of Christ picture had the haircut and the beard trim that was what was worn by the rabbis. So where your type of clothing and how you presented your head and your beard and so forth was an indication of your role in society.
It's very fascinating. Thank you.
That's what she told me. And certainly that explains why people walking down on the trails and so forth would take a look at Jesus and immediately call him rabbi.
Mhm.
Complete strangers. Makes that very understandable.
Well, I'll tell you another story about that particular painting. Um, they gave it to our family. The Carson congregation gave it to our family just before we moved down to Texas, and so mom and dad wanted to have it in a suitable frame, and so they took it down to the Sherwin-Williams store and picked out a frame and asked them if they would mount it, and they said they would. And it didn't come back for 2 or 3 weeks, and so they finally went back down there, and they had put it up in their front window and lit it so that it was the display for their store for that time because they liked it so much.
Wow. Thank you, John. I think it's just so neat how sometimes our asides prove to be so pivotal to our understanding. And thank you, Ron, for that personal clarification. That is a beautiful portrait.
One more thing about it. This is not firsthand, but I think she said it to my mother, but I'm not sure if it's firsthand with mom or not. But she said that she was privileged to see Jesus at some time later in her life, and she said if she'd have had that experience first, she never would have tried to draw it. So
Hmm.
so I thought that was interesting.
Help me understand that. Did she would not have tried to draw it if she had met him first?
If, yeah, if she'd actually seen him first, she wouldn't have tried. She would didn't feel like she could have done as a faithful representation. But
I thought that she had seen him afterwards and confirmed that her portrayal was reasonably accurate.
well, reasonably accurate, but didn't didn't um, didn't didn't convey everything about that
Right.
she saw that she saw. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Brent Larson, go ahead, please.
So this is kind of on topic. So I did a deep dive into the 70 weeks prophecy years back. And of course I started on the internet and I asked, when did the decree go forth to rebuild Jerusalem? And it gave me a really interesting answer. It sent me to Wikipedia, of course, because that's what they do. And it sent me It sent me to the walls of Jerusalem. So I'm going to paste that here. And of course, it's not ancient history, it's recent history. And it says that in 1535, so like 490 years ago, well, 89, that the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire made an official decree and rebuilt Jerusalem. So I don't know that that's the one that Daniel was talking about, but history kind of repeats itself. And I just thought it was really interesting at the time. It was not next year when I first discovered that. It was several years ago. In fact, it was 7 years ago. And I remember that because I was like, wow, that means there's 1 week left. But so apparently there's a lot of interesting places that we could hinge. And I say all of that not because I'm convinced that we have a year left and everybody needs to change everything. I say that because I mean, if you're interested in the topic, that's certainly a thing to stop and go look into and ponder about. But so
let me ask you, you said something about 1535. What was the 1535 date?
in 1535, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent
Yeah.
ordered or decreed the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And the walls that currently surround the old city are the result of his rebuilding.
Okay.
And I just thought it was interesting because it's 489 years ago, which is why I decided I'd go ahead and comment that because it's just too close of a hit.
Hmm. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Thanks for sharing that, Brent.
Yeah.
Boyd, go ahead.
Ron, you're mentioning Messiah is mentioned a couple times in the Old Testament, the King James Version. Of course, you know that in the IV, there's actually a couple more, I think, in Genesis.
Right. There's 6 more or 4 more in Genesis.
And, of course, some other places you mentioned, and, especially prevalent in our Book of Mormon and so forth. But there's another interesting place that I don't know if you're aware of where the Messiah is mentioned. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a fragment, it's 4Q 521. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And this is coming, huh?
I'm not, but
This is coming from a translation by Michael Wise, Abbott, and Cook. Let me read this to you. It says, "For the heavens and the earth shall listen to his Messiah, and all which in them shall not turn away from the commandments of the holy ones. Strengthen yourselves, O you who seek the Lord in his service. Will you not find the Lord in this, all those who hope in their heart? For the Lord seeks the pious and calls the righteous by name. Over the humble his spirit hovers, and he renews the faithful in his strength. For he will honor the pious upon the throne of his eternal kingdom, setting prisoners free, opening the eyes of the blind, raising up those who are bowed down, and forever. I shall hold fast to the hopeful and pious, and shall not be delayed. And the Lord shall do glorious things which have not been done, just as he said. For he shall heal the critically wounded, he shall revive the dead, he shall send good news to the afflicted, he shall, and then there's some missing pieces in the fragment, and he shall lead and the hungry shall he enrich. Very interestingly, these are very similar words to what you remember he sent to the messenger who took the words back to John the Baptist. It's very similar words.
Yeah. And now do they have that identified as coming from a specific source, or is this just a fragment that is there and they've
It's a fragment in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, it was found.
No, I know it's found, but did they say, well, this came from a particular prophet or
No.
no? Okay. That's what I was asking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and for that, I mean, if Messiah just means anointed one, then there's a lot of anointed ones talked about in the scriptures. Although I tried to look at anointed and almost always, and I mean, the only ones I found were relating to specific people that had been anointed ones, like David or Saul or whatever. So I didn't find a general one about an anointed one to come later on that, you know, somebody else might have said, well, that was Messiah, but I didn't find those. But I haven't done that an exhaustive search on
Okay. Monty,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, you were talking about etymology a while ago.
it. Yeah.
When it just the name Dead Sea Scroll, I was trying for years as a kid to figure out if it was the Dead Sea or the Dead Scrolls.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'm doing better now, but it was I still get the tickle out of that when I hear the name, because for the longest time I had a Sunday school teacher who was patient with me and finally decided to give the poor dumb boy a shot there and let him uh, finally understand what was going on. But you wouldn't think I'd have troubles like that, but that was an honest thing. The only thing that makes it funny is that the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was Dead Scrolls. I mean,
Yeah.
who wants to read them if they're dead?
Right.
Okay, Earl, go ahead, please. You need to unmute.
Getting it there. But who wants to read it when they're dead? Well, the Bible is totally written with dead people now. So I was at Graceland from 62 to 69, I believe. And I very much remember the Smith family there. And Delbert several times came up to Creston, Iowa, where I was from Creston at that time. So I kind of remember that type of a thing. And I bet it was I can't remember. I can't remember names, but anyway, that picture has been on my wall since then, and it's a beautiful picture. We always called it the smiling Jesus, and so our church here now in Michigan, we have it here also. So that picture's gone all over the world, I bet.
Yep. Certainly a good one.
What was your other slide?
Well, okay. If I was in Sunday school on Sunday, and I just let me share my screen again, and I'll show it to you. Let's see if I can do this. This is a totally unrelated observation to the rest of what I have. It's Isaiah 11 through 14, or 2 Nephi 9, 126 through 129, or 21, 11 through 14.
Okay, you're not sharing yet. Were you thinking you were sharing?
Oh, I thought I was sharing. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm now
Oh, we
sharing.
got it.
Yeah. It's okay. So it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. And that is our day. I think everybody can agree on that. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And Israel since 1948 has been gathering the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And the envy of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, Judah shall not vex Ephraim. And who is Ephraim? Well, Ephraim is the house of Joseph, and of course, this is Joseph's land. But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. And I wish I had this on I didn't have time to put this on a map, but Gaza was one of the five cities of the Philistines, and the Palestine comes from the word Philistine. So this is the Philistines toward the west. That's on the western side of Israel, on the Mediterranean side. And they shall spoil them of the east together. And if you go from Israel and east, you get to Iran eventually. And they shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Now, Edom and Moab are not still in existence as countries. We do know where Ammon is. That's in Jordan, and Edom and Moab and the children of Ammon were all on the east side of the river Jordan there. And that, I think, is a, whoops, I did that badly. Let's see if I forgot. It goes on to say that they will destroy the Lord will destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And I think that this is talking about what's happening right now, that we are seeing in our day the fulfillment of the prophecies that are from Isaiah. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for your consideration. And I think it's awesome that that these countries are still recognizable and after all of this time, and they seem to be shaping up just the way that the prophets talked about them. So that's
Wow, you anticipated my question because I was just anxious to ask about your application of Daniel to the modern day, and what a sad commentary it is. Yet at the same time, I'm astounded to see your comparison that there are only two references to the Messiah in the Old Testament and two in the New Testament. And then I think you said 47 in the Restoration Scriptures.
right.
So
Right.
I have grown up with the concept of the Messiah as fundamental to my belief system.
We all have.
Yet it appears to have been so commonly you find a word used more when it is more important to people.
Yeah.
And so here's one that was not as important earlier on, apparently, that has become more important to us. And I'm surprised at that because the need for a Messiah seems to me to have been something that has been need throughout all of human history.
Yep. Well, and of course, that partly goes back to the understanding of the fall of man, which is not referenced explicitly in the King James Version of the Bible, but it is referenced explicitly in the inspired version and in the Book of Mormon. And in Genesis, it says, teach your children about the fall of man, because that's why we need them. the Messiah, the Savior, so. Yeah, I found that absolutely fascinating that it was so sparse.
And I particularly, that's so impressive that the restoration movement has picked up so much of the positive image here. The saving grace of the Messiah, the prospects of a kingdom to come. This is such a Zion supporting commentary, and yet yet you're revealing it tonight as you have, I think is not something that most of us have been able to do. So thank you so kindly for doing it.
Well, thank the Lord, I just read the book.
Yes, when you read it out of that mathematical background and skipped over the many tekel in order to get to other numbers that were not as important to me.
Okay, Monty, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I found very calming about that whole sequence of events was that not only did they have the writings naming them Messiah, but they had it all wrong. So that made me feel like at least there's continuity there.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully we won't have it all wrong.
Ron, there's a comment in the chat about Gary Whiting says it was a very well done presentation. Thank you. He will likely be quoting you.
Wow.
They, Kenneth is raising a hand?
No,
Okay.
just moving it around.
Well, thank you all for listening. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm not always able to be here on Monday nights, but I try and get here when I can.
We so enjoy your presentations when you do. You just make it all sound so simple, but I know it's a lot of work that you've put into it that makes it that way.
Oh, thank you, Deb. Appreciate that.
Okay, next week, ladies and gentlemen, will be a review of the previous 8, and so hopefully Ron can come back for a 5-minute recap. And then the following week, we have Scott Forsyth on the influence of King Josiah, on Lehi, that is. Then David and Christine Perriman is coming with Hope in the Book of Mormon on the 28th. November 4, Paul and Jeannie are presenting the Amachromes. November 11, Paul Lucero is coming, and he called to apologize that he missed the last session, but he had COVID.
Oh,
And the 18th is Ray Holland. And Ray Holland will be speaking about angels in the Book of Mormon. And so that's scheduled as we have it to this point. And so, oh yeah, Ron Smith will be presenting about Christmas in the Book of Mormon on December 23rd, assuming that schedule works.
Okay.
All right.
yay.
Thank you all for sharing with us again tonight. Good night. The Lord is watching over you. Good night. His blessings go before you. Good night. And we'll be praying for you. So good night. May God bless you. Good night.
I was going to say,